Hello, my name is Charles Wheatley, and today I'll be presenting on Benjamin Franklin and his importance and role during the American Revolution. I chose Benjamin Franklin because, unlike a lot of those who we know now as founding fathers or those who were heroes during the war, Benjamin Franklin, number one, didn't serve in the military. He wasn't like George Washington and fighting on the front lines, but without him, we wouldn't have had the outcome that we had. I also chose him because he is one of the few founding fathers that was outside of the United States during most of the war. This was very interesting to me, and he was. It's very well known that he was in Paris during most of it. He was the first ambassador for France for the United States, and this was kind of lucky for us, as the relations between the French and the British weren't the best. So this helped us in terms of finding an ally within them, and as you know, we have uh, so many different signs of that past to now. But I also thought it was funny that um, if you look at it, Benjamin Franklin was obviously very smart, and I thought it was funny that the British at the time, the ambassadors from Britain and those who were in Paris and France, who were British, were rather jealous of Benjamin Franklin because he was very smart. He was very accomplished. He was at the time like a modern day philosopher, and no one in Britain could really compare to that. He made a lot of people jealous, like I said, and this kind of aided us in getting a closer ally, as well as giving them a little bit of a step down. So I will continue on, and we'll see where this goes. Because of Benjamin Franklin's work, we were able to win the Civil War. Although we were a strong nation in some senses, we didn't have everything that we needed. For instance, we lacked most of the resources for war. With the French's help, we received men, we received weapons, we received ships, we received all this different stuff that we needed. At the time, our military was a lot smaller than it is now, and a lot weaker than the British. So that was very important. If you look at how the uh, French saw us, thanks to Benjamin Franklin, it's really quite amazing. In 1777, when we originally had the United States flag, the French saluted it, the French Navy, excuse me, saluted it as a flag for all nations. This is interesting because, they're not American, but for them, they understood how important it was that the American experiment and the American Revolution turned out in their favor. They also knew that without it, it would not be as helpful for them socially. Um, and it would really obviously damage their relationship with the British. But this could also kind of change their world. Obviously, the government at the time did not want to change, but for the people, it was a sign of hope for a different future. Again, Benjamin Franklin's time in Paris was very influential for those who lived in France, and it aided the French Revolution in 1789. The interesting thing is, though, is that it's not like he was there and being one with the French people. He wasn't a hero of the French peasants. He spent most, if not all, of his time with those in the upper echelon, those who were running the government. This makes sense. It's what anyone would do if you're trying to get the approval of the government instead of just the people. Um, because, yeah, of course, his primary goal was to get aid from the French. But again, it is funny how the actions that he took Number one being the American Revolution and the goals and objectives that came from it, and how it all ended was kind of a awakening for the French people. But also, if you look at the financial support that France gave us and the bankruptcy that went to France because of the help that was given to them, it's kind of ironic. But it was important, and this was kind of his big influence on the country. Of course, he did do a lot more than just this, and he was in the United States for part of the war. So if you look at kind of the beginning, in July 1776, I thought this was kind of interesting, but he proposed to seal the United States, which there's two reasons it's interesting. I'll read it really quick, but it is Moses lifting up his wand and dividing the Red Sea, and Pharaoh in his chariot overwhelmed with the waters. He wanted the motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." I really thought this was interesting because if you look at the American Revolution and the United States as a whole, a lot of times religion wasn't very important, or that's how we kind of see it now, important to the founding fathers. But he said rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. So I kind of thought that was interesting, number one. Number two, I think it's interesting that he quotes this as it's very obvious as to what he's saying. I mean, most people at this time would understand the Bible and would have read it. And when you read this, it's kind of ironic that he's comparing the King of England to the Pharaoh, and what the Pharaoh did to the Jewish people at the time and to Moses. I really thought this was interesting, but I understand where he's coming from, and even though it wasn't used as a seal of the United States, it's still very funny. It reminds me too of his idea of the turkey being the national bird, but again, that didn't happen as well. Another thing he said during the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, was, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." This seems to be one of his big quotes during the American Revolution and just in general. It's, again, very interesting yet kind of dark. You know, it's we must all hang together, so we must all work together, or we shall hang separately. And so this kind of says if we don't work together, we're going to lose, and it's over. This is obviously very true, and it was a necessary thing to say because without it, it makes sense. But again, it's very dark. It's not very lighthearted. But at the time, obviously, we were going through the biggest revolution in history, and this is the kind of talk that's necessary in order to change history. So that was really about at the beginning of the war. This is really how he was taking it. Both of these, he was at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and this is what we started with, and this is what got the ball rolling for a revolution that would change the world. Another quote that was very important in the war was actually in a letter to Samuel Cooper on May 1st, 1777. It said that it is a common observance here that our cause is the cause of all mankind, and that we are fighting for their liberty and defending our own. I thought this was very interesting because obviously it brings the whole world together. We are fighting for their liberty and defending our own. The American Revolution was there to fight for the liberty of the Americans and get away from the tyranny of the British. Benjamin Franklin from the beginning knew that our fighting in the American Revolution would impact those other countries and those other people who are feeling that they are being suppressed. And now, 220 years later, 230 years later, excuse me, 240 years later, such a long time ago, but what I'm trying to say here is that we still see this as an impact in our daily lives. And all these different revolutions and all these different changes, you have the French Revolution, which this obviously impacted them, the Russian Revolution, all these different revolutions needed to have a foundation. And the foundation of these was the American Revolution. And Benjamin Franklin, I think it's very interesting that Benjamin Franklin recognizes that from 13 years before the French Revolution and, 100 some odd years before the Russian Revolution. Another interesting quote for me of his was actually at a toast at a dinner of foreign dignitaries at Versailles. This was said after the British foreign minister toasted King George III, likening him to the sun, and the French minister toasted Louis XVI, likening him to the moon. This said that George Washington, commander of the American armies, who, like Joshua of old, commanded the sun and the moon to stand still, and they obeyed him. This is kind of, I'd be a little touchy on this if I was to say that in France, obviously in regards to Louis XVI. But I think it's very eye-opening to how this American Revolution was. You have the British side, which has King George, and again the French, but they both stand still and obey Joshua. Again, it's another one where it brings in the Bible, which I thought was interesting, but more than that, it's the fact that he's telling these two nations to follow them and listen to them. And obviously that's how it was, not as much with the French, but really the British. And it's probably wasn't very appreciated at the time by both the British minister as well as those people that were in Britain. But it's kind of just a slap in the face at Britain, but a rather funny one at that. Obviously, Benjamin Franklin was highly important in this war, and his role is kind of overshadowed, I think, by a lot of other people within the American Revolution. But his goal was, even with all those others who participated in it, his quote from a letter to Benjamin Vaughan on March 14, 1783, kind of sums it up. It's where liberty dwells, there's my country. So obviously, this was around the time when the American Revolution ended, and a lot of what we were fighting for was for liberty. So with this, I don't think he means specifically that America is his country or the United States is his country and that's it, but I think he means it more as a whole, where liberty should be everywhere. And that's where he wants to be. He doesn't want to be in a place where people are persecuted and people don't have the ability to live the way they want to live. He wants liberty, and he wants everyone to have that freedom to be who they are. Another quote that he has is from a letter to Josiah Quincy III on September 11th, 1783, where he said, "There never was a good war or a bad peace. There was never a time when war is good, and a lot of times war ends with a lot of damage to both sides. And there's never a bad peace where peace is good. If you have peace, that's the most important thing. And you have a general understanding. That's what's necessary in wars as well as just in general. That's what you need. But a lot of times you have to go through wars and you have to go through all these different trials in order to have a better understanding and a better ending. Again, I thought this was I thought Benjamin Franklin was a very interesting person to speak on because he isn't talked about as much as other founding fathers, and a lot of people understand who he was, and people think of the printing press when you think of Benjamin Franklin. And I've been to his printing press, and I've been to Philadelphia, and there's obviously a big influence of him there, but a lot of people don't understand exactly what he did. Without him, we wouldn't have won the American Revolution. Even though he wasn't on the battlefield fighting for us, he was fighting for us in France. And with this, we had funds, we had a stronger military, we had a partnership, a relationship that still lasts till now, but lasted throughout that war, throughout their revolution, and was still highly important, again, to us now. We have the Statue of Liberty to kind of serve as the connection between both our nations. So, again, hopefully this is a good understanding as to what exactly both our countries did and how Benjamin Franklin was very important and his importance in the American Revolution. Thank you very much.